Hello, my name is Jakub Polewka, and I'm one of the duo that is creating Pick Please podcast that you listen right now. I'm a huge music fan. I go to lots of shows, and my co-partner in crime, Łukasz Wojciechowski, is a guitarist and also a huge music enthusiast. He couldn't be here today, so it'll be just myself. On the regular basis, we release this podcast every 2 or 3 weeks. We have it mostly in Polish, but every now and then we drop an episode that is in English. So for all the foreigners that are listening to that, you can give us a sub and a follow on YouTube or streaming services or social media, because every now and then some cool episode in English drops that you might be also interested in. So we encourage you to do that. And for this episode, we have an amazing guest. His name is Luthera Russella. He's a songwriter. He writes music, but he most of all writes lyrics for himself, for other artists. He's a producer. He's a very artsy person in general, has multiple interests. He creates also album covers for his projects. And yeah, he's a super interesting personality. His first band, the Bootheels, when he was a teenager, was created together with Jacobem Dylanem, the son of Bob Dylan, that later went to form the Wallflowers. The Bootheels had kind of the Replacements sound. It was a little bit punky. It was very raw, but it is a very good band. After this first project, Luthera Russella went on and formed another band called the Freewheelers. That band was kind of this roots Americana band. It was in kind of early 90s. They had some problems with record label. So after this project was done, he was working with Marc Ford from the Black Crowes in the band called Federale. They also had the problems with recording label, and unfortunately none of the sessions or albums were recorded, and then Marc Ford went on and created the Black Crowes. And Luthera Russella became a producer, became a solo artist, released many albums throughout the years, both singer-songwriter stuff, but also a little bit of rock and roll. There was even a kind of jazz album in between all that. He produced plenty of artists. He has a huge list on his website. I encourage you to check it up. He currently resides in Los Angeles, California. And recently he formed a new project with Jodym Stephensem. Jodym Stephensem was the drummer for a band called Big Star back in the 70s. They were a very influential band, and they influence, for instance, REM. They weren't a known band, but they had this kind of culty following from the fans, and they had an amazing reviews back in the day, but unfortunately they didn't really succeed in terms of financial success. So Jodym Stephensem was an original drummer for that band, and recently, together with Luthera Russella, that I'll be interviewing today, they created a project that is called Those Pretty Wrongs. They released 3 albums, and I had a pleasure of seeing them live in Paris on a living room concert organized there by this kind of circle of artists that organized concerts in their homes. And I managed to get invited to this kind of invitation-only event, and I saw them perform. And then I chatted with Luthera Russella, and we kind of connected. So I asked him if he would want to give an interview for our podcast, and he was more than happy to do so. Without further introduction, ladies and gentlemen, here with me today, Luthera Russella. Luthera, thanks so much for joining me on this one. This is such an honor to have you here.
Pick, please.
Yep.
No, thank you. Thank you. I've said that a lot, I've said that a lot. That's how I address my roadies on stage. Pick, please. I just hold out my hand. And I close my eyes. I say, pick, please.
That is what I do as well. That's where the name comes from, basically. It's from me being always in the first row and asking for guitar picks at the shows.
Exactly. I was just going to say, nice to be here. And hello, everybody.
Yes, it's very nice to have you here with us. Okay, Luthera, I'm going to start with something from your early life, because when I was doing a little bit of research about you and so on, I found out that you're from a songwriting family. So your grandfather, Bob Russell, wrote such a classics as Don't Get Around Much Anymore. And your great-granduncle, Bud Green, is a songwriter, for example, for The Sentimental Journey. So basically, you're from a family of musicians, and this family kind of legacy led you on this path that you had to be a musician.
Well, Jacob, don't believe everything you've read on the internet. We're actually from a family of coal miners. And no, I'm kidding. No, that's true. We were definitely on my mother's side, maternally, we were in the music business for, let's see, my great uncle Bud, his first, well, I don't know when the first published song was, meaning sheet music, but the earliest recording I've been able to find is 1918, which I would still call early mid-period Tin Pan Alley, since the true Tin Pan Alley started in the late 1800s, but the beginning of the recorded Tin Pan Alley does start around then. So I'd say it's fair to say early Tin Pan Alley. For Bud, who's my grandmother's oldest brother, oldest of 7. She was the youngest of 7. And then she eventually married a guy named Bob. His name was actually Sidney Keith Russell, but he went by Bob. His name was actually Sidney Keith Rosenthal, but when he was gray listed in the early 50s, he started using Russell for obvious reasons. Gray listing, for anyone who doesn't know out there, was a form of blacklisting when America was afraid of the Red Menace in the 50s. And gray listing was sort of an entertainment version of blacklisting. So Bob wrote Don't Get Around Much Anymore and many hits all the way up until his last one, which was He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother by the Hollies in 1969. And then he passed away, unfortunately, the next year, right before I was born. So I knew my uncle, but I did not know my grandfather. I hope that wasn't too confusing for everybody. And good luck translating.
Yeah, we'll draw a graph. That'll be an image that will show exactly, the cover of the episode will be a graph of your family tree.
Yeah, Venn diagram of, So the bottom line is both sides of my family, but especially my mother's, comes from Eastern Europe and the very end of the 1800s, early part of the 20th century, and lands in Harlem, New York. And that's the maternal side. And then the paternal side on my mother's side, meaning my grandfather's side, comes from England and lands in Passaic, New Jersey. So between Passaic and Harlem in New York, that's pretty much the genesis of the music side of my family.
Okay, so was it like you went to your parents and said, Mom, I want to be a doctor. And she said, no, you're going to be a musician.
Yeah, they strapped me down and said, they'd slap me a few times and said, you'll be a songwriter or we'll disown you. But no, I just gravitated towards music when I was really young. For whatever reason, I must have been banging on things. So they got me a drum kit very early. In fact, I got a regular set of Ludwig drums when I was about 4.5 years old. And that would be 1975. So I started playing drums. I was the little drummer boy for about 10 years. And then I can actually pinpoint it. Mother's Day of 1985, I picked up the guitar. A friend, like an older neighbor, taught me some chords and I was off and running. And I picked up the bass and I'd always tinkled on the piano. So that was the genesis of me musically. It starts with drums, kind of rolls through guitar and then into bass. And like I said, I was always tinkling on the piano.
Okay, I find it very interesting because a lot of people, they usually pick up like one instrument and then they kind of learn very long on it. And in very late period, they start with another instrument. But you kind of picked up so many at such a young age. So that's kind of crazy,
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I just played drums. But weirdly, I was very young when I started writing words. And so that might have been a little eerie for my parents because I have to specify my grandfather and my uncle, they were mainly lyricists. They wrote words. Because back in those days, you had partners. You had a composer and you had a lyricist for the most part. There was a few examples who did both, Cole Porter, for instance. But for the most part, even the Gershwins, who were brothers, one wrote lyrics, Ira, and one wrote music, George. So, that I was kind of dabbling in words as a young kid and at the same time playing drums. So between words and rhythm, that was my genesis. And then I think it was just a natural, at a certain age, you just say like, well, I have good rhythm and I like the Beatles. Why can't I learn a few chords? So I was taught these, like, you play guitar, right?
No, my co-partner in the podcast, Łukasz, is a guitarist. I'm just a music fan.
Yeah. So when I first learned guitar, it was kind of cool. My friend, this guy, Teddy, he showed me these 2-note chords. Instead of having to use 3, it was a lot easier for me. So he showed me a form of A that was 2 notes instead of 3, form of D that was no. So consequently, all the chords were kind of ponderous and melancholy and minor, because that's what that creates. You need 3 to make an E major, for instance. You need 3 to make a D major. So in learning these 2-note chords, I was kind of writing all these. I was about 14. I started writing all these sad, melancholy songs, which fit in perfectly with the music I was listening to and the feelings I was having as a teenager. So, it all kind of fit together. But eventually I learned how to make a major chord, and that was a big revelation.
And then it really started.
Wow, a major chord. So that's kind of, once I did learn chords, though, I started writing songs immediately. I don't know why, and I can't really explain it, but I did learn my chords out of the Beatles books. And so it was kind of handy because they show you the chords. You see the formations in the books I had, the 3 dots and all that stuff. But the big difference was I was familiar with the whole catalog, so I kind of knew why they were showing me the chords. I can understand the context of the chords, so I think that taught me really fast.
Do you know the sketch, famous one from like British TV about the book, which has no dots, that people learn music from? If not, I'm going to send you a link.
Please do. Yeah.
After, it's really good. It's Mark Knopfler in it and David Gilmour.
Oh, God.
And the others. It's really good. I'm going to send it to you.
That's great. Yeah, well, I know people joke about the dots, but man, I don't know how else I would have figured it out because I don't read music. I read a little bit of drum music, but, I can understand the rhythm values, but I've sadly neglected that portion of my musical education. I do everything by ear for the most part.
Okay, that's very interesting because you have such a broad spectrum, because basically you're multi-instrumentalist, you're a solo artist, you are a producer.
Yep.
You're a visual artist for Those Pretty Wrongs because you drew the album covers for it.
That's right, yeah.
On top of that, I found one of the interviews where you said that you wrote the script for a play that happens in 1919 in Harlem.
Yeah, it was actually not a play. It was like a television pilot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was an interesting project. The genesis of that was finding my grandmother's unpublished memoirs. And she, like I said, grew up the youngest of 7 in a tenement in Harlem. She was born in 1913, so she would have been 6 in 1919. So that was the genesis of that idea. And yeah, I kind of learned how to write in script form. It was almost like an exercise with working with, I think it's called Final Draft. And I worked on that for about a year, and then nothing's really happened with it yet, but it was pretty educational, just learning about that time and learning more about the details of the music industry at the time. It's a little unknown area of those early days in Pan Alley. So yeah, I write. I've always written. So I've written short stories. I've done articles in magazines and things like that. So I've always liked writing stuff. I've written bios for other artists and done various things of nonfiction and fiction area.
That's super interesting. What inspires you to follow so many different artistic interests in a way? And what keeps you motivated to do all that?
Well, when I was young, I liked to draw. When I was young, I liked to write. To be honest, if I were to pick an area where I'm highly motivated and always have been, it's more in the songwriting area. And that is something that I have never been able to turn off. I really don't know. I'm not saying every song I write is great, but I've had pretty good follow through with writing songs. I guess I must see it as some sort of puzzle. And I've always been my phone, for instance, filled to the brim with demos for years and years and years going back, sketches or full completed songs. Or even when I bring ideas to Jody in Those Pretty Wrongs, I've always been able to earmark the odd sketch and say, oh, that might be good for us. Let me see what he thinks of that. So I've been more prolific in the area of songwriting. I'm not sure I have the discipline, to be honest, to really be a straight writer, meaning writing books or writing scripts or writing, stories. And I don't know how much discipline I have in the drawing or sketching. But if it's a task that I'm given, I think I can do that stuff. But as far as in the area of songwriting, I feel pretty comfortable. I get into it really easily. I know what it is. I hear things. Of course, I'm a little more selective now as I've gotten older. I'm not as easily, oh, great. I can write a perfectly good song that I think is great, but I may never use it because that's not a direction that I want to go in. I hope that's not too long of an answer.
No. It's really good. If you want to explore one of the topics that I ask for more, I'm really happy about it, especially that the songwriting is kind of your main thing in a way.
Yeah.
Coming to that, I actually wanted to ask, because you wrote songs for many different artists. One of these were, for instance, Weezer for their White Album and Black Album, and also Larkin Poe for Blood Harmony. And this album, it got Grammy for Best Contemporary Blues Album in 2024. So that's really crazy.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a bit more about how these cooperations came to be? Because I think the Weezer albums were also nominated for Grammy.
Yes. Well, in the case of Weezer, I've been friends with those guys for many years, and I collaborated with the guitar player, Brian, who's a good friend of mine, for years. But in the case of the White Album, they were working with a producer, and the word sort of came down like, hey, for whatever reason, the management and the producer were open to submissions for collaboration with Rivers. And so Brian and I had been writing a lot together, and we thought, what the hell, we'll just send in a few things we've been working on. And they loved them. And one became LA Girls, which was generated off of a hook that I wrote, kind of a chorus. And the other one became Endless Bummer, which is something that Brian and I had come up with. So Rivers is really open-minded. That's why people talk about how he writes according to charts and graphs and all these different things. And that's just, I think he just looks for different ways of opening up his creativity. The guy's perfectly capable of writing a million great songs on his own. I think he likes to stimulate himself. So in other words, a good songwriter doesn't mind being tasked with something. The average person might say, well, that's weird. The management and the producer tells him what songs they'd like him to work on, but that's not weird from a creative standpoint. From a creative standpoint, it's like, yeah, okay, I'm a little bit of a dead end. Let me just be told what to do so I can have a job. It's like going to work in a cubicle for Tin Pan Alley or something like that. So he loved that stuff. We started getting demos back of songs of ours that he'd finished. And lo and behold, Weezer cut them, and that album did do pretty well. The fans really liked the album, and they really liked those songs in particular, and it got nominated for a Grammy. In the case of Larkin Poe, I was with a publisher who put us together, and I had this piece of the song. I think it was the chorus, same type of thing. And we got together and did a demo session and finished the song. And then that was about 5-6 years ago. And they started performing it live a lot, and they did it on sort of live sessions and podcasts and stuff, but like Jam in the Van and things like that.
Yeah, they do a lot of that. Mm-hmm.
They do a lot of that. And it became a bit of a fan favorite, but they never put it on a record. An album or two went by and they weren't putting the song that we wrote together on the record. Then one day out of the blue, I got an email from Rebecca, and she said, hey, guess what? We've recorded the song. We're so happy about it. I said, oh, that's great. And then again, it was a kind of a fan favorite, that song. It's called Might As Well Be Me. They pull it out almost every show for years. So
I like it as well.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And so they put the record out, and right off the bat, it got nominated for Best Contemporary Blues, and then it won. So that was pretty wild, and it's an honor. I mean, I'd like to do more of it, but I've collaborated not just with Jody and obviously them, but with other people. Like, in the early days, I collaborated with Jacobem Dylanem, and middle times I collaborated with Marciem Fordem from the Black Crowes. I've collaborated in songwriting with many artists, and I like doing it. I enjoy it. So yeah, that's kind of the story of that.
Okay. Yeah. So songwriting is one thing. And then the other thing you also do is producing, because you produce a lot of albums. I had kind of a look through your website where you have it all listed. I listened to some of them and I really liked some of the stuff. So I actually wanted to ask you, because you have so many different artists that you produce, how do you find them, or do they find you?
For the most part, they find me, but there's been the occasion where an artist falls into my lap and I develop that artist, and I'll maybe do the first single, and then it turns into a record if I'm lucky, and then it turns into a second record if I'm lucky. But for the most part, they seek me out. I'm not like a real aggressive marketer of my production, because my production style isn't for everybody. I'm kind of old school. You kind of have to want to work the way that I work. Not that I'm not open to working other ways. I just kind of make the type of records that I do. And it's, as we've gotten into the modern era, it's just less likely that someone's going to want to produce a rock and roll record the way that I do it. I've done jazz records and I've done folk records, and I'm comfortable with any album that is more performance based and based on the songs, and kind of like the records that I do. So for instance, I find it pretty easy to make records with Jody, but Jody's pretty old school, Jody Stephens. So obviously we co-produce those records together, but for the most part, the artists that I do work with, and quite a few of them work with me multiple times, which I'm very honored about, like Ned Roberts, who makes great records, and he's a really great singer-songwriter who I did in fact discover. So I'm working with an artist right now out of London called Morgan Noise, and I'm doing her first single with her band. She's in a band that's much bigger right now called Fat Dog. And this is more music kind of like Radiohead or something like that. It's more progressive, it's different. But nonetheless, they're such good musicians, and she's such a good songwriter. So they're a bit more of a performance-based concern. So I don't find it too difficult to work with them, because for the most part, they're a band. That's kind of like my area of expertise, so to speak, is just working with artists or bands that want to get a great, it's like I said, I'm just kind of old school, like the old school producers. And, I know quite a few legendary old school producers, some of which I work with, like John Leckie, and they're not called up that much either, because people are less likely to work with producers like that. I don't know if Steve Lillywhite's phone, and I'm not comparing myself, I'm just saying as far as the style, the methods of working, I don't know if his phone's ringing off the hook these days like it would have been in the 80s and 90s, because I'm not so sure people are making records like that and can even afford to. I have no problem with the way people make records these days, and I enjoy a lot of them. If I have any issues is just with the records that younger people are making these days. When I say younger, I'm in my 50s. So people that are in their 20s, for instance, or 30s, they can be a bit airtight. They can be a bit stiff. I mean, beautiful and easy to listen to. But I'm not so sure how those records are going to be sort of years down the line. I'm not sure how they're going to feel 10 years from now, 20 years from now. I think sometimes people need to feel something a little bit human in there for it to have some legs. That's just my hunch. I don't like people that express these sort of like they're just convinced about their opinions. I'm not convinced about any opinion I have. I don't see anything I feel as the letter of the law, but I just have hunches. I have instincts about stuff. And my instinct tells me that it's the modern way of recording has sapped a little life out of record making. If that's even what they're trying to do. I'm not even so sure that they're trying to make records. They're trying to do tracks, and people compose by making tracks now. It's a different way of composing and a different way of producing. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a little bit lifeless for me.
I think it works in certain genres, so to say. I also think that there is definitely a space for this authenticity that you mentioned in here, right? For something not to be 100% perfect, not to be as compressed, as polished and so on. So I think that basically both ways have their own kind of subjects, that they work for.
They do. I mean, for instance, when, I like quite a few of the records that Wilco's made, when they came along with Yankee Hotel, that actually wasn't a favorite of mine. To this day, I felt it to be a little bit tight. I actually preferred the one after it. I'm just using them as an example. There's like plenty of albums I like by them. I'm just saying that I tend to have a good sense of what might hold up quite a few years down the line, what might still feel pretty good, just sonically and stuff. And again, I think it's to taste, people just have their different tastes. I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's all subjective. But me, I just prefer to work a certain way in the studio because it's just more fun. I guess I like to feel to a certain respect that people are kind of having a good time making a record. Doesn't mean it has to be a good time record. It can be completely dark and devoid of any cheer. But it has to feel like, you know what, they were on a roll There's some kind of energy in the room. There's something happening there. And maybe that just has to do with the records I love and I listen to, but no one can deny the spark of a track on an old Dylan record. And that's what I like to listen to. I was just listening to an album. I don't even know how it's produced. I don't even know if I like the production, but it's such a good record. It's Brian Ferry's Bob Dylan cover record. Have you heard that?
I don't think so.
I was just listening to it yesterday. It's so freaking good.
Okay.
And it just rides a vibe. And I don't even know if I would have produced it the same way or anything. It doesn't even matter. I just think it's a good album. I think when an album's good enough, you don't care who did it, how they did it, what it sounds like, any of that.
Yeah, if it feels right, it feels right.
Exactly. So I guess what I'm probably was just trying to say with all that long-winded bullshit was, it's like when you're in a movie, you don't want to notice an actor. I don't want to notice the bass player. I don't want to notice the production. I don't want to notice how airtight something sounds. I don't want to notice anything. I don't even want to notice if it's live. I just want to listen to it and think, this is a great record. This is making me feel good, if that makes sense.
I think it absolutely makes sense. If it is there, it is there, and you kind of don't focus on these details in a way while listening to that album. And on the other hand, sometimes the production can be in such a way that you listen to an album and you think, oh my God, this is so weirdly produced. I had it recently with the new Nick Cave album. I don't know if you've heard this one.
I haven't heard it yet, but just something struck you as odd?
I love the album. I love the songs on it. I love it in a songwriting way. It's amazing. And I've seen him live recently as well. And these songs were absolutely a blast to hear live. But then the production is so strange on the album, and his voice is kind of covered so weirdly there is a bit of orchestral sound on it. He kind of disappears and all that. And it's very strange. I don't know why the decisions were made like that to make such a mix and production on it.
So it's sort of murky.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is, like, you can have good murk, like you can have a great Daniel Lanois record, but then you can have bad murk. That's, again, it sounds like you're trying to enjoy the record and then you're just sort of, unfortunately, you're just noticing something.
It sticks out
of it. Yeah. And so I know I can speak for Jody a bit and just say, like, we try to make our production something where you don't pay attention to that part of it. You're just busy listening to the songs and the way the music's being played. I mean, that's what we strive for. And I'm sure I can almost imagine that maybe Big Star tried to do that too in their own way. I mean, my favorite stuff is the Beatles stuff, because the sonic excellence, the striving for something that really punches and really hits in a really sweet spot. And so that's all I ever try to do. I'm just always trying to make something sound really good and bring out, via tweaking the arrangement, via tweaking the performance, via tweaking the mix, and via tweaking the way things are captured by the microphone, trying to just make it all make sense. And yet, like we were talking about, try to be transparent in some way. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, the more you talk about it, the less it makes sense. But really, you know it when you hear it,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you overanalyze, everyone's like, what they're even talking about.
Yeah, what are they even talking about? But I think you know it when you hear it. I'm sorry, you know it when you feel it.
When you feel it, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned Beatles, and that's one of the questions I have in here, so we're going to go to it right now, because you are one of the two members of the project called Those Pretty Runks with the legendary Jodym Stephensem, the original drummer for the band Big Star from Memphis. And I know that you put out 3 albums at this point, but the last time we spoke and I met you in Paris on that show of exactly that project, you told me that you're going to Abbey Road in London to cut some songs. So I actually wanted to ask you how it went.
It went great. We did our British tour right after we saw you, and that went really well. We ended up in London, and we had a nice day at Abbey Road with John Leckie, the producer. He's known for doing Radiohead. And I mean, he was a house producer pretty much at Abbey Road from 1970 to 1980. I think he was a tape op on Plastic Ono Band and All Things Must Pass. And let's just say when we were there, he knows where the bodies are buried for sure. He's already has great stories, but having him be our guide musically and literally in Abbey Road was really special experience. I love John. He's an old friend at this point. And we got a couple new songs done for hopefully a new record. We got some things tracked. So 2 songs at least. So it was a great experience. And anyone who's interested, it's on our Instagram too. There's some pictures and stuff of that. But it was really special. The second you walked into Studio 2, you could really feel the kind of stodgy magic in there,
I mean, it's Abbey Road. It's
it's just this dead kind of beauty in there, like a great studio. And I've been in quite a few great studios, but that was magic time for sure. And there's so many things about it that is hallowed. It's almost surreal being in there. And we did get to use 2 original Beatle pianos, the Challen. You've seen the Challen in the Hey Jude video. I don't think they used it on Hey Jude, but it's in the video.
In the video, okay.
Frost, but they used the Challen on literally, Fool on the Hill, everything. And the Mrs. Mills piano, which has these sort of lacquered hammers. And the Mrs. Mills piano is famously on Lady Madonna and stuff. So playing those pianos, I mean, that was almost pretty much worth the price of admission. I know what that feels like in a way because I have a piano which belonged to both my grandfather and my great uncle. And it started out in offices in the 30s in Times Square in the original Tin Pan Alley area. And my great uncle shared offices with Fats Waller. So there's pretty good indications that Fats Waller played my piano. And then it went on to my grandfather. And so there's this sort of specialness with my piano. And so when you play a special piano, there's a special vibe. I'm not comparing it. I'm just saying that there's a difference. When you play the Beatle pianos, it's sort of overwhelming. You're like, should I even be touching this thing or should I be smashing and banging on this thing?
Yeah, it should not be in a museum. Yeah,
exactly. But that's the thing is, I could put my piano in a museum. It's much better sitting in my garage, getting songs written on it and playing on recordings and stuff.
It's what the instruments are made for.
That's what they're made for. And I think they're much more, the Mrs. Mills piano is 1909. It had a lot of years before the Beatles came along and it's had a lot of years after.
Yeah, it's with the vintage gear like that. Also, the guitars is the same if you get some, Les Paul from 50s or 60s. I mean,
yeah,
they cost a fortune, but they have the spirit.
Yeah, if someone handed you a Strat, banged up 50 Strat, and you're like, oh, this is cool. You feel good about it. And then they say, oh, by the way, that was Buddy Holly's guitar. You might be looking at it differently, but at the end of the day, how does it sound? I had a similar experience with Jody because when we went in to do our first session at Ardent, we needed a 6-string guitar, and he has a guitar, which is the one he wrote For You on. But it's actually an F-Series Yamaha that belonged to Big Star. It's actually on the track 13. Wow. It's on the first album. And we also have access to Chris Bell's 330, which he used on I Am the Cosmos. And, they're great guitars, but it's funny because we used the 6-string on our first recording, but it was really hard to play. We didn't even get the bright idea to set the damn thing up until the second. We went to the second round. We're like, wait, why don't we take this into the shop and actually make it play better? And it was like day and night. I was like torturing myself on this thing just because it sounded nice, but it didn't play very well. Now it plays like a dream, but it is a great guitar. But, when you play it, you go, damn, Big Star used this guitars. It's pretty wild. Again, that's not the make or break of it. It's just another thing that adds to the legend. But at the end of the day, it has to be useful. You have to be able to make a great recording with it. Otherwise, you might as well put it in a museum.
That is true. Yeah. Okay, those pretty wrongs. I have a bit more questions about this project because I think you guys sound really great. And the concert I've seen was super special in this living room. It's been crazy.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you how it felt after so long that you've been putting out solo records and then suddenly, okay, now you're with Jody on those pretty wrongs where you trade ideas and develop songs.
Well, it wasn't that unnatural because when I first started collaborating with Jody, I think the initial concept was I was just going to produce like a solo record. That was what I had in my head, and he might have too. But for it to turn into a collaboration, a natural thing has to be happening anyway, if that makes sense. So, you know what I mean? Otherwise, it would have been more formal and it would have been like, okay, I'm the producer. You're co-writing these songs, trying to make it great. But at the end of the day, Jody just said, I can't see my name on a T-shirt. Jody Stephens, that's why he said, how about we just make it a band, a duo? And I said, wow, you sure you want to do that? I'm perfectly happy with being behind the scenes and this being your thing. This again, when we first started out, we first started writing songs, and we decided to record one. And he said, nah, you're putting in such an equal amount. It just doesn't feel like that kind of thing. And to my mind, I was just doing maybe just a little more heavy lifting than normal, but I was doing what I normally do. I record with an artist. I'm just not saying I normally write all their songs for them. I just do often collaborate on the songwriting part if they need me to, but contribute ideas and stuff. But for the most part, I feel when I'm producing somebody, I feel like I'm part of the project anyway. But with the case of Jody, it just was, I could see where he was coming from. He's like, it just seems like we're collaborating. Let's just make it a thing. And I hadn't even the faintest idea he wanted to do that. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, then he said, so we'll need a name. And then that's when we took the Shakespeare quote, which was in one of our songs, like a B-side, Those Pretty Wrongs was in a line that he wrote. So I guess that sort of answers your question. The bottom line was that it was a sort of a smooth transition for me, pretty seamless.
How does it work? Because Jody is in Memphis and you're in LA. So how do you bounce the ideas between each other? You record something and send each other, or?
Yeah, it happens a number of ways. I mean, when it started out, we hadn't really gotten this was 2013 or 14. So we didn't really, he would just like leave an idea on a message on a voicemail. And then I would just sort of like throw some chords together and say, hey, do you mean this? And I'd send him a voice memo. And we sort of did it back and forth like that. And that worked. And until finally he got the hang of voice memos. It would just basically toss back and forth till a song emerged. So to this day, the first time that we both say thumbs up, it's a song, it's done, it's usually me performing it. And then he'll learn what we wrote because that's just the way it goes. He has an idea. And I said, what do you think? Does it sound good like this with these chords and maybe these extra? Yeah, that's great. But let me write a bridge. What do you think of this? Does this sound good? We go back and forth. And finally, by the time it's finished, I'm still the one performing it on the demo, which is interesting. Then he sort of learns his version of what we have done and makes his own adjustments to that. And then we don't usually hear what it's really going to sound like and what it's going to become as Those Pretty Wrongs until we do it in the studio. So in a way, that's kind of preserves the sort of surprise element of it.
Just get together and finally play it and record it.
Yeah, what's this actually going to be? So in a way, it's not very premeditated that way because I never know what it's going to sound like with Jody singing until we go in the studio. And he always surprises me. It's always pretty special. And then by that point, I've already worked up the harmonies. So I'm so familiar with it. And then we take it on the road. In the case of the Abbey Road session, we did something a little different where we picked two songs and we didn't really do them live, but we did them at sound checks and got the hang of them before we went in there. So that was pretty cool. Having the chance to tour a bit and practice the song together at sound checks. We did that once before with our second album. We did that with one song where we practiced it at a couple sound checks. But for the most part, we just kind of walk in and smash it out.
Yeah, that's good. That's the way it also used to be, where people couldn't book the studio for, a week or two. You had a couple hours, you were going in and you had 1, 2, or 3 takes and that was it.
Yeah, exactly. The Beatles didn't have any time. Why should we?
Yeah. Cool. How does it feel? Because you work with Jody, and at this point, Jody is the only surviving original member of Big Star. That is this huge legend that kind of grew around that band. And This feels like, in a way, a continuation of that. So how does it feel to continue that tradition? Because it seems like a responsibility of some sort when you look at it that way, right?
Yeah, but we were hoping, we were praying really when we did the first album that we would create some sort of identity of our own. I mean, obviously what's in the DNA for both of us is in the DNA. And Big Star's in my DNA because of cutting my teeth on that stuff pretty early on, like in my teens. And Hit's obviously in his DNA because he was in the damn band. But once we got the first record, sort of that birth was more difficult. Once we got that record out, it's funny, the other ones came more easily and we started to find I think on the second album, we really found some sort of identity. So having found an identity, and now it's to the point where people are coming to our shows and it's not necessarily, you can tell people really like our music and they're enjoying the actual music of Those Pretty Wrongs as opposed to being a sort of offshoot of Big Star. So being in that position now, it doesn't feel like much of a responsibility. It's more just, I think the people that enjoy us, they enjoy the fact that Jody is a creative entity beyond Big Star. I'm not saying he was lying fallow when he was doing, say, Golden Smog and stuff like that. But now that I understand the metric and the measurement of his songwriting talent, which I always had a suspicion about because of songs like For You and Fear of Falling and things like that. Now that I've really somewhat teased out this sleeping giant of a poet and a songwriter, I'm just kind of like, wow. I mean, some people are late bloomers. And he's not that dissimilar to me. I told you I played drums for 10 years, and then I gravitated towards writing and things like that. So I think people that are enjoying our music, they might love Big Star, but they're enjoying the fact that Jody is having a bit of a creative renaissance of his own.
That for sure. It's hard to get rid of the influences that you have, obviously, but I can surely say that this sounds not as a, oh yeah, that's another Big Star kind of record or whatever. It is definitely its own thing. I love the stories in these songs. They're so beautiful. Like every song tells this really captivating story.
Oh, thanks.
My favorite part of it is basically that if you listen too closely to the lyrics, it's like an episode of a TV show in a way.
Well, that's Jody. He's got the sort of lyrical hook usually, even if I do sometimes some of the lyrics. That's the thing. When I first started collaborating with Jody, I said, I'm into this. And I think this stemmed from originally it was going to be a Jody project. I just said, let's do this, but you need to be front and center. And the main reason, it wasn't because, oh, you're the more known person. It was more like, just to legitimize it. I wanted him to write the words mainly. I wanted him to sing it and it to be come from his feelings. A, because they're legitimate and he's a natural, but B, because it was important that he wasn't just the drummer who happens to be singing a tune. It was important that it's really his thoughts and feelings so that he could understand that the more that you invest yourself, the more you're putting on the line. The more you're putting on the line, the more conviction that you'll have. The more conviction you have, the better songs they'll be. That's how great songwriting is just conviction. The conviction to follow through and say something that you need to get off your chest to people, however they need to interpret it, however they need to hear it. And I think Jody caught on to that. He's a smart dude, and he caught on to that very, very fast. Right away, he was like, oh, wait, I can do this. It's like riding a horse. I can horseback ride now. I can do this. And no one needs to show me anything anymore. I can figure this out with the horse. I'm not the horse in this analogy, people.
Let's all hope so. Okay. Another interesting kind of topic.
Maybe the horse's ass.
That's a good one. Okay, I have another question because you had 2 songs that you cut in Abbey Road for Those Pretty Wrongs, and now you also have your solo album coming up. So how did you decide? You wrote a song, let's say, or you had an idea. How did you decide, okay, that's for me solo and that's for me with Jody?
I mean, that was easy. I mean, this batch of songs I primarily wrote quite a number of years ago because I had another record I recorded in between that I've decided to shelve for now. But it's pretty easy. But like I said, I'm prolific enough to where I usually earmark the ideas that might make sense for me and Jody, and they usually don't really ever touch the area that I'm going near in my solo stuff. And plus, my solo stuff tends to be more completed. I don't get the chance really to finish it. I mean, of course, I can have a sense about it. Like, okay, if I'm finishing it, then obviously it's for me. If you listen to the record, and I'll send you a link, you'll see that I don't think any of it really makes sense in arena with me and Jody too much. And it's kind of a rock and roll record too. And we don't really do that. Stuff we do can be rocking, but this is straight up like a rock and roll record, like my last one. So I guess I do my light stuff now with Jody and my heavy stuff with myself.
Yeah. The single suggests it's a rock and roll kind of thing. As I said, it has this kind of like Laurel Canyon feel to me. Like the guitars, they sound kind of like the Byrds or something like that. But then it also has this 90s sound to it. It's kind of like Between the Walls in a way.
Yeah, probably. It's mainly influenced by stuff Definitely the Byrds, but because I'm using the 12-string Rickenbacker, it's influenced by quite a few bands that I enjoyed when I was in my teens in the 80s, like bands that might have used that stuff, REM and Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, and by some more modern things too. But yeah, it's just by the nature of what it sounds like, it can straddle those eras a bit. I mean, the funny thing about the new record is it's, again, people do tend to focus on the sound of my records because they can sound different to each other sometimes. But the lyrics have always been the most important aspect to me. And hopefully people can get them, can understand them. And, or, you know, once it's out there, they can check it out on the internet and see what the lyric is. But, and if I send it to you, I'm happy to send you lyrics as well. But that's the main thing for me. And the music is sort of the backdrop to what the words are trying to say, I guess.
Okay, so the writer's soul, as you said before, that's your main thing, is writing.
The words are really important. They're not incidental for me personally. They are for many, many people, and that's okay. That most people these days, they write in kind of impressionistic way. Mine are slightly impressionistic, but only in a way that it's more intentional with me. I'm really saying things in the songs and trying to paint a bit of a backdrop with the music. So yeah, I guess I would call me lyric forward.
Lyric forward. Okay. That's the description I'm going to put when we'll be putting out the episode then.
Feel free.
Lyric forward.
Yeah. Or lyric forward as told by the horse's ass.
Lyrics first.
On second thought, don't put that. Lyrics first, as the horse's ass. I mean, that's where it's at. But the new record is really, for me, I've made all kinds of different records, and some of them are pretty good. For whatever reason, I just feel like it's weird when people say, oh, this is my best record or whatever, because I have different types of records. But this would be probably my most immediately just successful record as far as what I was trying to do. It just kind of came off because it was mainly cut live in about 3 days. And then I just kind of poked at it here and there. And so it was kind of there right away. It had a really quick gestation. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just real happy with how it turned out.
You mentioned that some of the songs on that album were some ideas that you had before. A couple years ago, the album of yours, which was the Selective Memories and Anthology, and half of the stuff on that album that is like 2.5 hours long, over half of it are outtakes from albums that never came out. And then you have so many ideas. How big of a shelf do you have at home where you shelf all the ideas?
Just more like chaotic bags of old cassettes with no covers on them and no writing of what anything is.
Wow.
And I had a lot of DATs, like digital audio tapes, which recently a storm destroyed a bunch of stuff of mine, but I just had to just toss it in the garbage. But I'm not sure how much of an overlap I had. Mostly an overlap probably with the cassettes. But yeah, I mean, before I could get it all on my phone, because I have voice memos now, but even on my phone, like I said, the voice memos go back pretty far, like maybe 10 years. So you don't need the shelves as much. But yeah, I have a lot of songs in storage. And this label in Spain, he said, I'd love to do an anthology of the outtakes of your music. And I said, great, I'll send you some stuff. And I sent him everything I thought was halfway decent from over the years. And he just said, let's do it all. And I said, oh, okay. I didn't realize he'd want to just use it all. I thought he was just going to take some selections. But I only gave him stuff I thought was good, that I particularly liked. A lot of them were just demos that I'd done on the 4-track or this or in the studio that I just thought were pretty good. Because an artist, the records that go out are just usually a fraction of what he's doing. It's difficult to get a record out. It's not easy. Unless you just kind of do something and just put it up. But, historically, it was always difficult to get a record out. So a couple of years may go by before a record comes out and you gather all this material. So that's what I had.
I think that the anthology made sense because you have such a large span of different things that you did in different styles as well. I mean, you have a jazz album, you have singer-songwriter albums, you have rock and roll stuff, you have your own projects, and it's kind of good to have this one retrospection where you can go through it and see like, okay, that's how Luthera Russell developed throughout, all the years until the current moment where he has this new project with Jodym Stephensem. If you want to take a look, it's great because it has all of the things on it in a way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, over the years, there were certain things I did because the instrumental album was my second record. It was just kind of a happy accident. It's just something I did on my spare time when I was kind of stoned with some buddies. And I was just like, oh, this is cool. And then, but it got around because I was living in Portland and it's a small town. And finally, some labels like, can we just put this out? And I said, sure. And it was a bit of a sensation around town for a year or two. So, and it was cool. It's just something I did on the 4-track cassette. So I didn't intend on that, but I thought, what the hell? So some things you just do because you can, and sometimes they turn out cool. And that's why I like my new record, because that's more what my original intention was when I first started making music, was just to do music like my new record is, and kind of like my last record. And so it was good to do the anthology just to kind of show the different aspects of what I've managed to do over the years, which I thought would be, it'd be kind of sad if no one heard this, or it might be, it's kind of nice to bring this out. But you learn a lot over the years. One thing I can say positive about the anthology is I think the recordings sonically, they hold up nicely. Nothing sounds too dated or anything. I don't think you could really date anything. You can more just say, oh, this is this style and that's that style, but kind of recorded into tape and done in a kind of an organic way. It's chronological as well. If anyone seeks out the anthology, they might want to note that it starts out in the late 80s and it pretty much goes straight through for 30 years. So it does give a good idea. If it's an easy way now, if people say, hey, what have you been doing? I can just give them that. I actually showed you should I put a Pretty Wrong song on there? And in the end, we decided, nah, because I don't really sing them. So it didn't make sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is good. And as you say, sonically, it holds up. Even the earliest things on it, it is absolutely crazy because they're just demos that you had with Jacobem Dylanem in your project, Bootheels.
Yes.
And that still sounds really good for what it is, because basically this is some kind of old tapes that were never meant for release, right?
That's right. Yeah. I just recorded us to my 4-track. Thank God I did, because we were only together for a few months, but it was a really good band. And I shudder to think that if we hadn't done some things to the boombox, or we hadn't done some 4-tracks, because we went into the studio, real studio. We were recorded, but the session went wrong, like there were some technical issues and it was sounding amazing, but it just didn't. And then right after that, it broke up. So I did have those recordings that we had done on the 4-track, and then Omnivore dug them up. And I gave them to Omnivore, and I think I played a track. She might have heard a track on the anthology and thought, is there more there? And I said, there's more there. And she ended up putting it out as a record. When I say she, I mean Cheryl there at Omnivore. And I'm really glad she did, because it reconnected me. I'm always in touch with Jacob, but it enabled us to do something creative together, and with Toby too. And he's an ex-Wallflower, and even connect with Aaron, the drummer, who was a really old family friend. And our moms went back to the 60s, and stuff. And so it was really a nice project to do. And I do think the stuff holds up really well. It's an unbelievable band if you consider that we're all 17.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like that.
No, and the drummer, he was in his early 20s. He was probably why we sound so good, is he was such a damn good drummer. But it really does not sound like a bunch of teenagers. That's what's crazy. It's got that teenage energy. But, Jacob was already starting to show that he did more than just play guitar. He was writing and he was contributing, and he just wasn't ready to sing just yet. But he started singing like the next year, when he formed the Apples with Toby, and then that turned into the Wallflowers.
There was also a song that I think also wasn't published anywhere from the project Federale that you had with Marc Ford from Black Rose.
Yeah.
That's really cool for the Black Rose fans out there that listen to us. I know there are plenty, because we are also, me and Wooger were huge Black Rose fans as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a great track. And Mark and I wrote a lot of songs, and there's a lot of demos out there that the Federale did, because we got signed to Geffen, and we were going to make a record with Jack Douglas, and it's all in the liner notes. If anyone can find my anthology on CD, it's a double CD. I did a full booklet of liner notes in there, and explains everything about every song. So I don't know if you've seen that or heard that part.
No, unfortunately, I just streamed it, but I looked for a copy.
I would look for a copy, yeah, because the liners are amazing in this set. They're really thorough. And Bud Scapa, who's a great writer, who's the first writer to review Big Star for Rolling Stone, he did the introduction, and so did Larry. Larry Crane from Tape Op magazine also did an introduction to it, which was nice. But yeah, the Mark Ford stuff we got a lot of good songs out of that. And we had a good collaboration there at the turn of the century.
Yeah, but you were unlucky with the record labels and in general, because I read through your history and it seemed that you had really bad luck with record labels. It was always like, oh, we wanted to put out this album, but then they went bankrupt or got bought by someone else and we got dropped. And it's kind of a reoccurring thing in your biography is that you weren't lucky with the record labels.
No. And it's probably just, it just depends on, I've been signed to Geffen twice, the Freewheelers and then Federale. So, and I've dealt with some smaller kind of labels. And for the most part, no. I mean, right now I've been working with Brent at Curation for a couple of years and it's great. It's, we're kind of cut from the same cloth and he's done nice stuff with Those Pretty Wrongs and he's putting out my new record. But for the most part these days, record labels, unless you're on a really big major and there's a real big push behind it, it's more of a collaboration now with the artist. And I'm used to that. So that's fine. But yeah, in the past, in the days of the big labels, those were just a fucking shit show. You'd have to be around it to know. It's like a lot of money would get spent and all the best people would be brought out, but nothing would get done. Part of it was probably because I just wanted to go and just let's roll tape. Let's make songs. Let's do stuff. And understandably so, there was a structure to that thing. And I didn't understand that as much. I mean, it's just as much on me as it is. Say, for instance, Gary Gersh, who signed my first band, the Freewheelers, he also signed Nirvana at the time. And there was a way of doing things. And like these days, for instance, let's say you get lucky enough to have a budget that you can put together, and then you go to hire a publicist. That publicist has to want to work with you, by the way. And they have to think that they can do something with you. Otherwise, they just take your money and just say, sorry, it didn't work out. A good publicist will think, okay, I think I should take this on. This is in my wheelhouse. This will work out. So by the same token, back in the day, a big major label, they could only work with what they had. The Freewheelers were a very raw, kind of rough band, and we weren't open to a lot of streamlining. It didn't make sense in that era with our band. We had the attitude of a punk or a grunge band, but we just happened to be more of a kind of proto-Americana band. There was no label for what we were doing then.
Yeah, that was grunge years, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, the Americana label didn't really happen until like the mid to late 90s. And this is 1991 we're talking about. So we just kind of got on with it. And let's say our A&R person heard a single, we said, fine. He wanted to come down and do things that he felt like would help guarantee it to get on the radio. And he also wanted us, by the way, to work with a producer that wanted, like Scott Litt, for instance, we wanted to work with the producer we wanted to work with John Fishback, who had done stuff we admired, like Stevie Wonder and Carole King, which was very, very just not in the vein of what they wanted. They wanted someone like had produced REM and produced Counting Crows and things like that. So right off the bat, we probably got off on the wrong foot by insisting on our producer. But fine, even our producer was open to working with the label. And you know what? I just didn't give a fuck. I was 19, I was drunk, and I didn't give a shit. And I wrote all the songs and I sang them to the best of my ability. And I just was not even aware what it took to sort of come to some sort of middle ground on anything. I just wanted to show up after a hard night of partying, sing my ass off on my own songs with my own band and get the fuck out of there. You know what I mean? Like, I just didn't have any conception of, like, if I now, as a producer at 53, right, was producing myself then, I'd have a hard time with myself then. I don't know how I'd get on with myself then. I know that I would know exactly what to do, but I wouldn't know if that younger version of myself would be open to doing it.
But when you're young, that's basically how it is. You want to conquer the world your own way.
Yeah, well, I wasn't mature. I mean, to be honest with you, the bands that worked out, like Nirvana, like the Beatles, like these kind of bands, say what people will, but they were mature enough to accept change, to accept compromise. And to understand that there were certain things, famously the Beatles said to themselves, they said, here's the keys to being the Beatles. We will always be a band. There's no leader. And we write our own fucking songs. Other than that, we'll do whatever the hell they want us to do. If you think about it, they compromised on everything else. We'll wear suits. Everything you want. We'll do whatever you ask. We'll let you edit the singles. We'll let you tell us exactly what key the song should be in and what we should, whatever it takes to get a record made. But what we will not compromise on is we write our own fucking songs. There's no solo acts in this group. And believe me, they tried to turn them against each other and they tried to get them to do other people's songs. And it didn't work out. But the thing is, when you know what part of your integrity you won't compromise, it's much easier to compromise the other stuff. You have a little bit of a bargaining chip. That's called maturity. I didn't have that kind of maturity. I couldn't figure that out. I was also in a band full of lunatics as well. The whole scene was crazy. No one knew what the next thing would be. No one knew where the direction of music was going. And on top of that, we were nothing like the direction of music. We were more like Green on Red or just, the band or something. Bob Dylan. The winds were not going in our direction. They could have if we had been produced a little more to fit in and make sense. And we probably should have been open to that. But on the retrospect, if you listen to the first Freewheelers record, it's not very dated.
No.
It's not perfect by any measure, and it's got its good things and its bad things, but it's a good little record that does not sound dated at all for 19. There's no gated drums. There's no, digital echoes and stuff. Whereas we did compromise on our second record, and that album's a piece of shit to me, but not to other people. But I don't like it.
Okay. I think I like the first one more, but the second one is okay. It's not bad by any means.
Well, the songs are great and the band was amazing, but George Drakoulias, the producer, he sucked the life out of it. He tortured us over that record and he didn't produce us in the right way. He's done other bands the right way. He just didn't do us the right way. So it took too long to make and it essentially broke up the band. But that album started out with a lot of promise and a lot of hope and good songs and good vibes and good chemistry. And he just, by the end of it, it was like there was no band, there was no album, and there was no hope and chemistry. So that's the thing. I learned a lot about producing from how badly Waiting for George went. I really did. I know it sounds funny, but it's true.
It's good. You kind of learn on the mistakes, yours or someone else's. So that's good.
Yeah, and it's deep down inside, I always believed I could produce this kind of better. Deep down inside, I had that's why I started producing records, because I was like, I think I know what to do here. I think I got the hang of this. And in many ways, I think I was right in that people have trusted me. They've entrusted me with their money, their budgets, their productions, their direction, their sound, their focus, their songs, and their performances. Many, 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 many times. Whether successfully, I don't know, but it's a different music business now.
But they for sure didn't compromise on the artistic side of it.
No. And, again, the Freewheelers, every musician in that band was just next level and still is. Next level. I'm not kidding you, man. I might have been the worst musician in that band. That's how good that band is. Like, John's the best drummer I know. Dave, he's crazy and has issues, but he's the best organ player that I've ever worked with. Chris is the best piano player I've ever worked with. And Jason's the best bass player I've ever worked with. That band was so next level musically. And people like that, musicians like that, are untethered from the normal way of doing things. Good guys, but just we were crazy, man. Now just add our ages in. No one was over the age of 24 in that band. It was just an unreal combination of musicians and really difficult. Now, if someone had walked in and produced us that we really we really respected John Fishback, and we'd still do to this day, but he might have been in over his head with the personalities, with just how crazy these kids were. But for instance, if like Neil Young had walked in and said, I want to produce your band, we probably would all shut up like little schoolboys and listen to him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it would have taken someone just of extreme, just mythical status to get us to shut up. You know what I mean? And that's what never happened.
Well, but, you learned from the mistakes. And did you now self-produce your upcoming record?
I did. Yeah. I've self-produced my records. It's not fun. I don't enjoy it that much, but Jason sort of co-produces with me, Jason Hiller. He was the bass player for the Freewheelers, and we've, for the most part, collaborated on all the records. He's got his footprint, his fingerprint on all the stuff I do, including those pretty wrongs. And we mix together, and he's a brilliant engineer. So he's probably the best engineer around. Knows everything there is to know about balance engineering. He's as good as anyone I've worked with. And so I find it much easier to self-produce when I have Jason there to bounce off of in a kind of non-confrontational kind of way. And I trust him. But yeah, I self-produced it. And that's probably why I have a positive view of my new record, because it wasn't too difficult to make, which just wasn't that hard. It wasn't like pulling teeth. But that's why my records sound a certain way, because in order to do it myself, I've had to kind of resort to methodology that's more sort of gut instinct, and like I might choose a demo over the real thing and stuff like that, like with my album, The Invisible Audience, where rather than try to do something and then say, okay, that's the idea, now let's do it for real, sometimes I'll just use that initial plan. So yeah, that's kind of where it's at now. I'm happy to work with another producer. Ethan Johns produced my fourth record, Repair, and that was great. That was a great experience.
Okay. So the album is coming out January 17, 2025. The album is called Happiness for Beginners. I really like the title.
Thank you. That title is courtesy of a friend of mine, my British friend, John Tottenham, who's a poet and visionary and self-described expert at failure. But he gave me that title, and I promptly wrote the title track to it and then used it for the title of the record, because he's a good conjurer of monikers. Yeah.
It's a catchy one for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have some guest musicians coming to play on that album? Because you're a multi-instrumentalist, so you could theoretically play every single thing on it. But how it is with the new album?
So yeah, I have a guest, which is Sarah Beth Tusek, I produce, and who's my partner. And then I have also Jason Faulkner, who now tours with, he puts out solo records, tours with St. Vincent and Beck, but he was in the band Jellyfish, and he was in the legendary band called The Greys, and he's just a great power pop genius. I mean, he's an old friend of mine, and I brought him in on this record and done a few tracks, and he just did some beautiful, magical stuff. He's on the new single Downtown Girls, does the solo, and he's on one of the next singles, which is called Wanna Be Your Lover. He does some harmonies, and I think he plays keyboards on the title track. So I'm really happy to have Jason Faulkner. Yeah.
So it's not only Luthera Russella on that album, there are also other musicians.
Exactly.
Very good. Okay, yeah. I have two kind of like a closing questions for you then. First of all, what are the goals and dreams of Luthera Russella today?
What are say that again?
The musical goals and dreams.
Oh, goals and dreams. To make lots and lots of money. And to make lots more money. No,
okay. That makes sense.
I don't know how lofty my aspirations are, other than to just, I've really made some records I'm really proud of. I'd like them to be heard. It'd be great if they were heard by more people, if Pretty Wrongs were enjoyed by more people. I'd love to get some national exposure by way of things like television and different things like that, but they're not really gripes. They're just like some aspirations. But as far as hopes and dreams, I would just really like to, and you're speaking just musically, I would imagine, just to hopefully be able to continue doing what I'm doing, I think. And as much as I'm enjoying it, as much as it's enjoyable to make music with what I consider to be my good friends, I mean, I don't have like these major goals. I mean, I've done a lot. It's been fun. I don't believe in careers, really. I just think people that, it's more like last person standing, kind of thing. If you happen to just keep doing it, I'm a lifer, this is what I do. I don't know how to do much else. So I like making records. I like writing songs.
And as long as it's fun along the way, that's what counts, basically.
Yeah, but it's okay if it's not fun. It's not, no one said it was going to be just a cheery ride sliding on a rainbow with unicorns. is. It's just, sometimes it's difficult, but I think I'm better at navigating the difficult parts of it. They still rear their ugly head. I've had some funky interactions in the past couple of years, but I'm always surprised I wasn't able to sniff them out to begin with, because I'm pretty good at that now. I've only working with people that don't give me grief and I don't give them grief. So when that does happen, it's kind of shocking, but it does happen. And that's all part of it. Musicians they're a fickle bunch. I've dealt with a lot of them, including myself. It's bad enough dealing with yourself, let alone other ones. And musicians tend to get inside, or any artist for that matter, kind of gets inside their own head. So the key is not doing that. And you have to be really supportive of other musicians, sort of psychologically and sort of emotionally, to get the best out of them, which in turn gets the best out of you. So it's sort of self-preserving kind of thing to do that. To be there for your fellow musician and friend is only helpful to yourself, and vice versa. So that's how you get some good collaborations and some good teamwork. I believe in teamwork. That's my jam. I've done projects where I've done every note of it myself, but in some way, shape, or form, there's been teamwork involved in some way, whether it's finally mixing it with someone, or someone's mastered it and I've done that with them, or the final release of it where you've had to collaborate with people. In some way, you're going to collaborate, and that's just what happens.
Yeah, I think it opens up a perspective, because if you are just yourself and doing everything, you cannot look at it from the point of view of a other person, how he would see things and contribute some ideas and give at least a comment on that, right? But when you introduce more people into it, you need to adapt and kind of discuss things, then you discover new things. Exactly,
yeah. I am in it to have a good time. It's just that, I'm not going to shrink off if I happen to have a bad time here and there. You got to have a little resilience. But the goal is definitely to be as successful as you can doing what you love to do. That's really the goal in anyone's line of work. Hopefully you love your job so it doesn't feel like a job, and hopefully you're successful at it. If this became the biggest podcast ever, that'd be a great thing, because you like doing it.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. We do it after hours with Łukasz, and it's a hobby project. We love it. And it's also not all the time just fun and flowers. It's also hours spent on editing and cutting the ideas and so on. But then, all these moments like this one right now when we're talking, it makes it worth it.
Oh, thanks. Likewise. I'm really honored to be. This is definitely the first thing I've ever done for Poland. And I had no idea I had anybody that knew my stuff over there. So pretty cool.
Yeah, now it's going to be more.
Yeah, hopefully. I toured Japan a number of years ago, and when I did, I had no idea I had that many fans there. I mean, there wasn't like a ton, but it was enough to do a tour, and they had my records, and it was really, really a nice experience, and I sure'd love to go to Poland someday. So that's pretty cool.
Okay, Luther, I have one last question for you, and I think it's one of the most important ones. What is the best piece of music advice that you ever received? And if you have any music advice to share with our listeners, then now it's the time.
Yeah, I'm not sure the best advice that I've received, because I've received so much good advice that I either, as I was expressing to you about my younger days, I either didn't listen to, or some that I did. But I think the best advice is to try not to get hung up on semantics and bullshit, and just sort of like, there's never a way not to see forward in the studio or with a song or with a collaboration with somebody. I mean, sure, if the friendship goes south, that's one thing. But if you're trying to collaborate on some music and stuff, there's always a way forward. You can't just turn the lights off at the studio and go, well, we'll get it next time. No, you can find what you're looking for if you just keep looking, or if you just keep your mind open enough, you'll find the solution. So I guess that boils down to is, don't take it so seriously.
It is not a serious business. It's arts and music.
Exactly. In fact, the funnier it is, probably the better it is, in a way. I mean, look at Bob Dylan. He's hilarious. And the other bit of advice would be that someone else's advice that I do agree with, it's funny. I only heard this a couple of years ago, but apparently George Harrison in the mid 60s, at some point when he started wanting to write more songs, and this must be the only time he ever asked advice from John Lennon, but he asked him, hey, what's your best advice for songwriting? And John Lennon told him, whatever you do, finish the song. It might be shit, but it's good to follow through. It's good to finish the song so you know what you've got. It's good to finish it before you move on. And I got to tell you, that's the best piece of advice that anyone could give anybody. It's really good to finish things. That's what people get hung up on. They get scared to finish because then they're faced with the reality of what they've created. And the reality of what you created might not be that great. People might not like it. Tough shit, buck up, move on, try to do it again and get something better.
Learn from it. Yeah.
Learn from it. Yeah. I mean, you have to finish songs, because I have finished songs even as recently as in the past month or two that I thought, man, this is I think I wrote something really good. And, show it to my partner and, she just says, I think you've done better. It's like, God, nothing more deflating than that. But you know what? Who cares? I got other songs. So that's pretty much it, is like not to be too serious and to just try to finish. That's the two things I could come up with.
Finish it up. And if it's not that good, then tomorrow's another day. And try to make it better.
Yeah, 100%. Tomorrow's another day. My uncle wrote a great song called Tomorrow's Another Day that Al Jolson did. It's a good song. You should look it up.
Okay. I will. Okay. Thank you so much, Luther. Please tell us, where can we find you in the internet space?
We've got my website, which I try to maintain. It's called lutherrussell.com. And then I've got Luther Russell Music, which is the Instagram. And then I'm on Twitter too, and mess around on there sometimes, and even Facebook, because, I'd love to not be on any of it, but there are people and friends and fans who are on one platform that doesn't want to be on the other, and so to speak. And I feel like those are probably the best places to find me, other than just to, generally Google it. And I implore everybody out there that hears this to pre-order the record, because I'm not sure how many copies there are going to be. Happiness for Beginners is out January 17th, so maybe give it a click.
Yeah, we'll link it up in the description of the video for streaming and YouTube for sure. So a link to it.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you, man.
We will link everyone up. Luther Russell, thank you so much for joining in our podcast. It was a pleasure to have you in here, and I hope we get to make it someday again.
I have to edit out every ridiculous thing that I've said.
I love the ridiculous things.
Podcast.
No. All this stays.
Oh, that's cool, man. I'm glad that you enjoyed, and it was nice to talk to you, man. It was cool. Hopefully I wasn't rattling on too much.
No. It was absolutely perfect. Very interesting things were said, and lots of lessons for sure for everyone.
Hopefully we'll see you soon. We got to meet in Paris, so something tells me we'll meet again.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. And with our listeners, will probably hear us in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks. We'll see about that. Goodbye.
Goodbye. My dogs have something to say about that. Okay, guys, shush. They'll calm down in a minute. You might have to edit them out. I have two
It's all good.